Hey everyone, just making a video here to go over a question that went up on the page, and it was in November's page by Michelle Martin, but she's here as well in December. The question was, she's going to start tracking again from Sunday. Do we work up the same principles though, as in like earning your carbs or carbs after a workout? So it's a really good question, and I've put up another post that I had in last month's page, but you'll see it on tomorrow in terms of like the order of priority of things to control. So if we look at like weight loss, just like losing weight, the number one goal is a calorie deficit. Now, manipulating carbohydrates, which is something that we've always done or doing, is with the intention of, there's a couple of reasons, but the biggest factor in bringing carbs down is to bring calories down. So if you're not tracking, like reducing your calories is easily done by reducing your carbohydrates. But when you're tracking and you're able to actually kind of look at a closer look at the numbers, you do have a little bit more flexibility and a little bit more freedom. Now, the principles of good eating are still always going to be the same. It's whole, natural, unprocessed foods, like lower GI carbs, good sources of protein, all of that. In terms of principles, that's all the exact same. Now, if you are tracking, the most important thing is the calorie deficit, firstly. So when your body's in a calorie deficit, your body will basically break down tissue. Now, that tissue can be muscle or fat. So then it's kind of like a layered thing. So after every step, there's some considerations. It's like a diagram or flow chart. So firstly is to hit a calorie deficit. That's the most important thing. You can't lose weight unless you're in a calorie deficit. Now, you can achieve that deficit a number of different ways. You can reduce carbs. You can reduce, you can intermittent fast, like stop eating after a certain time. You can do loads of different ways to get to that. But we want to be somewhat like of a sustainable, consistent model that's actually enjoyable. So what we're doing to get into that deficit is by reducing carbohydrates, which I'll explain in more detail now as well. Second most important thing is then your protein intake. So we want people to hit at least like 1.5 times their body weight in grams of protein a day. So a 60 kilo person should be aiming for at least 90 grams of protein per day. This is going to keep you fuller for longer, so will decrease the amount of calories you eat because it'll fill you up. But it's also going to protect the muscle you have. So when we lose weight, we don't want to lose muscle mass. And that's what your body will do if you don't eat enough protein. So someone can go, and I see it all the time with people on a DEXA scanner. If someone just goes and like diets and doesn't pay too much attention to their diet and just like, right, I'm just going to eat less. Or I see it a lot if someone is vegetarian, they might eat enough protein. And what happens is they tend to lose weight quickly, but a lot of it is muscle, which you work hard to build. So once you're in that calorie deficit, the next thing is, are you eating enough protein? And that's the next most important number. And we want protein to be eaten at every opportunity. So every single meal, eat your protein. So number 1, cal def, 2, protein. Number 3, then, the third most important thing is going to be carbohydrates. And really, if you can just get calories and protein sorted, the rest kind of looks after itself. Now, we are doing that anyways. If you're a person that doesn't want to track, you're still following these rules, but you're just maybe a little bit less accurate at doing it. But you're creating a calorie deficit by reducing your carbohydrates. You're eating protein every meal, so you're still hitting those targets. The third most important thing is carbohydrates. And the rules still would be, good sources of carbohydrates, low GI, slow releasing, getting plenty of fiber, whole, unprocessed, natural foods. So that's all still perfectly the same. It's still good practice to, restrict your carbs to the times that you're training. Now, if you're tracking and you've figured out your protein, you've figured out your exact calories, all of that stuff, you probably will find that you do have a little bit more room for maneuver with carbohydrates. So then you can, if they're tracked and accounted for, you can have more carbs. But I would also still recommend having them around your training times in particular, because then they're going to be most beneficial. And then within carbohydrates, there's a few other considerations. And this is why carbs are the macro that we'd want to bring down. One is because your body can run on fat and use fat as an efficient fuel source. So that's really good. 2, people tend to overeat on carbs because there's an abundance of them and they're easily consumed in large amounts. 3 is it's going to raise people's blood sugars and insulin levels, and a lot of times people have glycemic control issues where people have high insulin, high sugar. So if we're going to tackle in macronutrient, it's always, we always want it to be carbs to come down. And then also, that can lead to other things, like if people are having like high GI sugars and stuff like that, and ups and downs and all that. So we definitely want to get carbs in control. Now, when we're overweight, we want to restrict it to that post-training window. But if you have tracked and accounted for, you do get more of an allowance for carbs. Third is fat. So fat isn't, once you hit a minimum amount of fat, which we want everyone to do, you can go from like 0.75 gram per body weight to gram per body weight. But generally speaking, people will get enough fat if we stick to our healthy fats, if we encourage people to eat full fat products, nuts, avocados, eggs, all of that. Usually fats isn't an issue. In terms of body composition, you can eat too little fat and it can have an impact on like hormones and stuff, but generally speaking, people don't. And you can't really eat too much fat, bar if it contributes to a greater calorie surplus. So, if someone can eat 2,000 calories a day of fat, and it doesn't really matter if those calories are accounted for and equated for, like they burn a lot of energy or they're really heavy or whatever. But if that person only needs 1,000 calories a day and they're eating 2,000 calories, it's going to contribute to weight gain. So yeah, just to revert back to the question, if you're tracking, you do get a little bit more of an allowance. I'd still encourage you to use those carbs like pre-post training, ideally, because then they're going to be most impactful. It's still good practice to pull down on carbs on non-training days, or times when you don't necessarily need all that energy. But you do get a bit more of an allowance for it. And then the idea is when you've tracked for a little while, whether it be a week, or if you wanted to go for the full 3 weeks or 4 weeks of the month, that's no problem. But the real benefit of tracking comes from just being able to like eyeball your meals going on then. So if you track for a week and you start to see, okay, well, I've stayed in a deficit yesterday and I had a very, pre-portioned, I had like a breakfast, lunch, dinner, one snack, and that kind of works for me, and that I can visualize what those meals look like and how big they are. Then, without tracking, you can still fall in under that. So that's why it's so important to track at some stage. So I've posted up the tracking challenge again and another little snippet of info about the order of priority. So we have to be in a calorie deficit to lose weight. Whether you track or not, your body is tracking, and it can't lose weight unless you're in a deficit, essentially. Next most important thing is protein, because you don't want to be losing muscle. And then next is going to come carbs, fats, then timing and micronutrients. So but really, if we can just get your calories in check and get your protein in check, a lot of the other stuff kind of looks after itself. So yeah, any more follow-up questions, let me know.